What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we've got our Week 13 fantasy football wide receiver starts and sits for every single matchup, so make sure to tune in. If you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. Let us hear in the comment section. You agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have. We will do our best to answer them all. But with that being said, let's get right into it. Today's video is brought to you guys by Birddogs. And look, I know we're all searching for that perfect pair of shorts or pants that offers the best style, the best comfort, the best bang for your buck. Well, guess what? That search is over because Birddogs offers all of that and so much more. If you're looking for shorts, they have a ton of options with activewear, casual wear, or even beachwear. On top of that, their pants have a selection of khakis, joggers, and sweatpants. So what are you waiting for? Regardless of the occasion of the season, get yourself the most stylish, the most comfortable pair of pants with a built-in liner from Birddogs.com. And if you use promo code ADP today, you'll get a free rope hat with your purchase. Again, that's birddogs.com, code ADP, and you'll get a free rope hat with your purchase. Make sure to check out birddogs.com, link in the description, and we kick off week 13 on Thursday with the Bills at the Patriots. From the Bills side of things, I'm starting Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis. Diggs has been as consistent as you could want this entire season, a top 3 wide receiver. Now, you might be a little bit surprised to see I have Gabe Davis, maybe ahead of Isaiah McKenzie, who I have as a sit, especially after last week's performance. But look, I contend that what we saw last week from Isaiah McKenzie, where he outplayed Stephon Diggs, you could argue, in a monster week, is just short-term success, maybe an anomaly, if you will, because McKenzie, even though he is talented, he's been somebody that's been behind Gabe Davis for the majority of the season when Davis has been healthy and available. Now, yes, there is going to be volatility at the number 2 wide receiver position for the Bills regardless. That's why I've said that Gabe Davis is a boom or bust wide receiver too. Kind of what saves these guys and gives them huge upside on a week-to-week basis is the fact they play on the Bills offense with Josh Allen. So I understand if, you want to take a chance on Isaiah McKenzie, but I do think it'd be a classic type of situation of chasing the points. I still think Davis is the number 2 wide receiver for the Bills. I'm going to say about him what I say every week, and that, again, is he's a low to mid-level wide receiver 2 with boom or bust upside, and I just don't think McKenzie will see enough volume consistently. Then for the Patriots, Jacoby Myers. Look, it's tough to really get excited about any of the Patriots wide receivers, but without a doubt, Myers has been the most consistent one all season long. Now, sure, Parker, Aguilar had some success this last week, but I don't want to invest in them and take a chance starting them, considering they're on an inconsistent offense, and that Myers himself has just been the top wide receiver for the Patriots. Now, again, I'm not saying any of these guys are wide receiver 1s or even high-end wide receiver 2s or reliable mid-level wide receiver 2s. Probably kind of low-end wide receiver 2s, primarily in PPR formats where Myers gets you right around at least 10 points every single week. That's what you're prepping for, and I think that's kind of what we can expect this week. Other guys just too volatile. That's why Parker and Aguilar are sits for me. Then we go to the Packers at the Bears. Really only one wide receiver I'd take a chance on. That's Christian Watson, and I'll make this remark in regards to him. He's pretty boomer bust this week. The reason being is, first and foremost, the Packers right now banged up at the quarterback position. Aaron Rodgers has said that he will play, so that's a good thing. But he's less than 100%, which is affecting him as a passer of the football. Also, the Packers are going to prioritize running the ball when they can, and they definitely can versus the Chicago Bears. I mean, look at the first time they played them. Look at the Packers when they've had success running the football. They prioritize that, and I think that's going to be the case here. Now, I do have Watson as the start ahead of Allen Lazard. You might be surprised considering how much I've been beating the drum for Lazard all season long. But right now, the Packers just don't have the offensive volume to sustain 2 fantasy-relevant wide receivers. And it's not Lazard's fault, but I just think that Watson has come on very strong as of late, and he's kind of taking over that role. So without the volume, Lazard is tough to trust, so that's why I have him as a sit. And then for the Bears, regardless if Justin Fields plays or not, I'm not starting any Bears wide receivers. Darnell Mooney, he's on IR. If you have Simeon, As the quarterback, tough to really put too much stock on any of these wide receivers. I guess you have Chase Claypool and then guys like Pettis, just a bunch of journeymen, Equanimeous St. Brown. So tough to trust those guys. With or without Justin Fields, I'm sitting all the Bears wide receivers. Then we go to the Steelers at the Falcons. Again, another game where I'm not excited about the wide receivers. I'm sitting all of them, including for the Steelers, George Pickens, Deontay Johnson. Those are two main guys. I know what you're going to say. Well, this is a decent matchup. One of these guys can get you around 4 catches, 50 yards. Maybe you throw in a touchdown. The problem is both these guys kind of have that same ceiling. And this Steelers offense is absolutely pitiful in terms of passing the football. So sure, you can get 4 catches for 40 yards, but these guys kind of vulture each other a little bit, and it's tough to trust them, tough to get, again, excited about 4 catches for 40 yards, and then relying on Pickett to throw you a touchdown. That's why I'm sitting both these guys. I think the Steelers with this Falcons matchup, they're going to prioritize running the football, whether it's with Najee Harris or somebody else. So I just can't trust the wide receivers. For Atlanta, similar type of situation. They have a lot of talent with Drake London, but they just aren't feeding him the football. They are a run-first team. I don't think that's going to change, at this point in the season. So tough to trust any of the wide receivers. London is the biggest name. I'm sitting him. If you're sitting him, I'd sit all the other guys as well. Afterwards, Jets at the Vikings. So for the Jets, without Zach Wilson, introducing Mike White as a starter last week, he actually looked viable. Now, again, keep in mind that was versus the Bears. So we're not going to see what we did every single week from the Jets moving forward, but Garrett Wilson remains the top guy for them at the wide receiver position. I would start him. To me, he is a solid mid-level wide receiver 2. I wouldn't go chasing the 1 touchdown that Elijah Moore had the first of the season for him. To me, he is still a sit. And for the Vikings, I'll start Justin Jefferson, again, a top 5 wide receiver. And then Adam Thielen. I think that, Thielen is kind of that boomer bust, low-end wide receiver 2 category. This last week, he had success. If you need wide receiver help, I take a chance on him, but just realize what you're working with in Thielen. Then we go to the Jaguars at the Lions. This is actually a game that I'm excited about as far as high-scoring upside goes and as far as fantasy weapons go. For the Jaguars, usually this is not the case, but I have Zay Jones, Christian Kirk, and Marvin Jones as starts. I mean, Zay Jones was absolutely spectacular this last week versus the Ravens. I still think he's the number 2 wide receiver for the Jaguars. Christian Kirk is the number 1 guy. He kind of had a down week. I think he bounces back versus the Lions. Marvin Jones, a little bit of a revenge game versus the Lions. Not that that's the reason why you should start him. You should start him because the Lions are absolutely god-awful defensively. And I think the Jaguars are going to be in a situation where they're trading blows through the air with the Detroit Lions. That's why I think that all these guys have decent upside, worst case low-end wide receiver 2s. For the Lions, just Amon-Ra St. Brown. Again, until Jameson Williams starts for them, I don't really want to trust any of these other wide receiver 2s, especially now with DJ Shark back. The anticipation is that Williams will not play for Detroit, so that's why you see him as a sit. If he somehow magically does, I think he's going to be less than 100%, on a snap count. So I'd rather sit him, sit Shark, sit Raymond, Josh Reynolds if he plays. So Amon-Ra St. Brown, a high-end wide receiver 2 in this matchup. Afterwards, Titans at the Eagles. For the Titans, I'm only starting Treylon Burks, and again, he's one of these guys where he's primarily a volume play. You're hoping for 5 catches for 60 yards, something like that. In PPR formats, that's going to get you 10, 11 points. So that's the appeal for him there. He's a low-end wide receiver 2, probably high-end wide receiver 3 more accurately. And then for the Eagles, you've got A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith. I will take a chance on them. I think they can have success. A.J. Brown, little, revenge game type of situation. Not that, again, that should mean all too much, but I like their chances here versus the Titans. I think Brown is a low-end wide receiver 1. Devonta Smith, boom or bust wide receiver 2. And then I'm not starting any other Titans wide receivers, Robert Woods, Ikine either. To me, they're way too volatile, not enough volume on a run-heavy offense, so they are sits. Afterwards, Browns at the Texans. This one's interesting. Deshaun Watson makes his season debut versus Of all teams, who else? The Houston Texans. I'm going to start Amari Cooper. He has been, for the most part, very solid this season. And now with Deshaun Watson under center, I think you could argue his upside is even higher. I do have Donovan Peoples-Jones as a sit. You might be a little bit surprised to see that. But the reason being is this is the Texans, and they're atrocious defensively, especially versus the run. I think we could see a huge Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt type of game here. Also, David Njoku returning at tight end. He's taken away some opportunities from DPJ as well. This being the first game from Deshaun Watson, wouldn't be surprised if the Browns say, you don't have to do too much. So I just don't think the volume is necessarily going to be there for DPJ. I'm only looking at Amari Cooper. I think he's a high-end wide receiver too. For the Texans, it might seem crazy that I again have 2 wide receivers as starts for them. Regardless of who the quarterback is, whether it's Mills or Kyle Allen. I said it last week. I thought that both these guys had about 10 points in fantasy scoring. As far as upside was concerned, that was pretty much right on. As far as the projections, I think we can see a similar type of situation. I think, the Texans are going to have to air out the football here to keep pace with the Browns. But again, if you're expecting anything more than right around 10 points, don't start these guys in that scenario. But that's kind of the neighborhood of what your expectations should be for them. Then we go to the Commanders at the Giants. So really only one wide receiver apiece that I'm going to start here for Washington. It's Terry McLaurin. I mean, Curtis Samuel didn't even get a target this last week. He's very much so behind Terry McLaurin. I think McLaurin here can have a bounce back game, if you will. It's just that for Washington, if they're in a game situation where they don't have to throw the football a bunch with Taylor Heineke, they're not going to. So I think this is going to be a little bit of a tougher matchup than what they saw versus the Falcons. So I think McLaurin is a solid mid to high end wide receiver too. For the Giants, Darius Slayton is a guy that is just going to get volume. He's a volume play, similar to maybe a Treylon Burks. I think that you start him there for 5 catches, 50 yards, a deal like that. So I have those expectations for Slayton. If you need anything more, don't take the chance on him. And then I'm sitting Curtis Samuel, and I'm probably sitting Richie James. Other than the 1 touchdown Richie James had last week, not all that impressive. I don't want to put too much stock in the fantasy wide receivers for the Giants, so I'm not starting any more Giants wide receivers than I have to. Afterwards, Broncos at the Ravens. Look, the Broncos offense is an absolute garbage right now. Just absolute dumpster fire. It's awful. I mean, Russell Wilson playing like a backup quarterback. I don't know how else to say it. But Courtland Sutton's still fantasy viable because he's getting force-fed targets. And I think the Broncos are going to have to pass the football versus the Ravens. So Sutton, 6 catches, 70 yards, something like that. High-end wide receiver 3. For the Ravens, I'm just sitting all the Ravens wide receivers. I think that's just your safest bet at this point in time, especially versus the Broncos here. I mean, the Broncos are awful offensively. If the Ravens can put up like 14, 17 points against them, then they're just going to run the football. Lamar Jackson is going to prioritize running the football as well. It's going to be Mark Andrews and then everybody else. I think it's just a safer bet to sit all the Baltimore wide receivers at this point. Then we go to the Dolphins at the 49ers. This is a game that you should be very excited about as far as fantasy wide receivers are concerned. I think this is going to be the highest scoring game of the week. And I think that Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle are both wide receiver 1s. I think you can make the same case with Deebo Samuel and Brendan Ayuk. The 49ers, they're not going to be able to just run the football here versus the Dolphins. They're going to have to pass it. Deebo Samuel, I like his upside. I like Brendan Ayuk's upside as well. I think they're going to bounce back compared to what we saw last week. I mean, they didn't have to do all that much last week versus, the New Orleans Saints only put up 13 points, but they did shut out the Saints. That's not going to be the case this week. Christian McCaffrey also a little bit banged up, so maybe Samuel and Ayuk are going to get a little bit more volume. I think they're both high-end wide receiver 2s. Then we go to the Seahawks at the Rams. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, they're solid starts. I think they're both in the wide receiver 2 category. The only thing that I will say is they can find themselves in a negative game script here because the Rams are absolutely god-awful, and maybe the Seahawks just run the football on them. So just realize that Metcalf and Lockett have a little bit more boom or bust type of upside this week. For the Rams, you could argue that you shouldn't start anyone, especially since Matthew Stafford might not play again this year, but Van Jefferson is, at this point, by far and away the best option that they have. Allen Robinson, Cooper Kupp, both on IR. Probably for the remainder of the year. Van Jefferson is going to get the volume. So again, another one of these wide receivers where he's not exactly great, but the Rams are going to have to pass the football to keep pace with Seattle, and Jefferson is the top guy. So from that perspective, Van Jefferson, I think, can get you, again, around 5 catches, 50 yards, maybe a touchdown. He's got the big playability, so a decent dart throw. Then Chargers at the Raiders. For the Chargers, it's always tough with the wide receivers because you never know seemingly who's healthy, who's not. So Keenan Allen, I would start. He seems to be past that hamstring issue, didn't have any setbacks. I think he's in that wide receiver 2 category. Mike Williams, is he going to play? Is he not going to play? If he plays, I'll start him because I think this can be another high-scoring affair. But if he doesn't, then Josh Palmer would be the substitute, pretty much like the case has been all season long. Now, I do have DeAndre Carter as a sit. He had an absolutely monster game this last week, but again, I don't want to go chasing the points. If you look at DeAndre Carter's performances, when he's had huge games, the weeks afterwards, he hasn't been consistent and reliable in following those games up with other big performances. So from that perspective, I wouldn't get too excited with DeAndre Carter. I think it's going to be Keenan Allen. I think it's going to be Josh Palmer, Mike Williams if he plays. And even if Mike Williams doesn't play, I think it's Allen, Palmer, Austin Eckler as far as pass catchers, then DeAndre Carter. That's why I have Carter as a sit. Devontae Adams, obviously you're going to start top 5 wide receiver. Mac Hollins I have as a sit, even though he did have some success this last week, but it was, all things considered, on a one big touchdown type of play. So to me, Mac Hollins is a guy that only if you're desperate are you really going to be starting him. Then Chiefs at the Bengals. I'll start Juju Smith-Schuster, but we're kind of back in that territory, kind of like at the start of the season, where I'm not all that confident in starting him. I think he's a boom or bust low-end wide receiver too. The reason I say that is because, maybe it's him kind of returning from the injury, but he didn't see the volume this last week. The Chiefs kind of prioritizing maybe running the football a little bit more. To be fair, though, the Chiefs didn't have to air out the ball last week versus the Rams. So I do think Juju Smith-Schuster will have a little bit of a better game. But again, I need to see him get a little bit more involved until I say he is a for sure start and a guy that has high-end wide receiver 2 upside, which right now he doesn't. And then I'm sitting MVS and Sky Moore. If I'm on the fence about Juju, you better sure as hell bet MVS and Sky Moore are sits. Then for the Bengals, Jamar Chase didn't play last week in a turn of events. He is expected to play this week. I'm starting him. I'm starting T. Higgins, and I'm actually starting Tyler Boyd because I think this is going to be a game where they have to pass the football a bunch, and Boyd, with Jamar Chase returning, should return to kind of his slot role. I think that's going to, probably do him a little bit better. And I think, again, considering the matchup, considering the Bengals are going to have to pass a bunch, all these guys are solid starts. Chase and Higgins in the wide receiver 1 category. I think Boyd low-end wide receiver 2. Then Colts at the Cowboys. I'll start Michael Pittman. He's the top wide receiver for the Colts with Matt Ryan back now, and he's in the mid to high-end wide receiver 2 category. Paris Campbell kind of had a disappointing game. All things considered, came out of nowhere. With Matt Ryan under center, he had been averaging a bunch of targets. All of a sudden, that disappeared this last week. I'm willing to give him one more chance, but I will label him, like I've been saying before, a low-end wide receiver 2, even wide receiver 3. That is boom or bust. For the Cowboys, it's CeeDee Lamb. He's the main guy for me. Should have had a touchdown last week, but didn't. Oh well. He's a wide receiver 1. Michael Gallup, it's tough to get excited about him. I still think that, he's still recovering from his ACL. You've got Dalton Schultz there who's getting opportunities. You've got Zeke. You've got Tony Pollard. There's talks about Odell joining the team. Tough to get excited about Michael Gallup. He's a sit. Then Saints at the Buccaneers. I'm only starting Chris Olave for the Saints. Regardless whether it's Andy Dalton or Jameis Winston, Olave is really the only Saint wide receiver you can trust. Worst case scenario, his floor is like 5 catches for 50 yards. But his ceiling is much higher, so you start him. For the Bucs, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. Evans had a dud of a week, but he still got the volume, and he's still the top wide receiver for the Bucs. I think he's going to bounce back, and to me, he is a high-end wide receiver too. So is Chris Godwin. But with that, we wrap up our Week 13 fantasy football wide receiver starts and sits for every single matchup. If you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at alldaypigskin to continue interacting with us there. Let us hear in the comment section, did you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have. We will do our best to answer them all. And in the meantime, we'll see you guys in future videos.